Good morning. Welcome to Shattering Myths, a program devoted to the largest segment of society, to those who know that all of the world's religious, political, economic, and military institutions are corrupt, rotten to the core, counterproductive. Our number, if you'd like to join us anytime over the next 2 hours, toll-free, 877-300-7645. I've spoken at length on this program recently about a topic that is the antithesis of popular culture, that is the antithesis of what's being touted in the media, the antithesis of what's being pontificated by politicians. It is the antithesis of the rhetoric we get from our military and from all religious leaders. And that is that our problem isn't that certain people hate and that their speech is laced with hate. It's that we don't hate enough. A great example of just the political disdain for aggressive speech is Donald Trump. Now, I'm not a fan of Donald Trump. I think that many of the things that Donald Trump says are just stupid. But nonetheless, from both the Republicans that are running against them, like Jeb Bush, and from the Democrats, like Hillary Clinton, they say that the tone isn't presidential, that the media is saying that he's just angry, and angry is not acceptable, that he's angry at the American political process, and that won't fix anything. Now, I'm here to tell you that while his rhetoric is very often inappropriate, the problem isn't his tone. The problem isn't anger. In fact, if there's a problem, it's that we don't have enough people who are condescending, who are judgmental, who are condemning. We have 5 or 6 stories today, all about abuse being perpetrated around the world by Muslims. Most of it is geared towards the Islamic State, which is the most fundamentalist Islamic organization and the most powerful and most popular Islamic organization in the world today. And I am just livid, quite honestly, speaking of hate, at the media and politicians for the inability to hold Islam accountable for the abuses that it's perpetrating. Whether it's our politicians, the media, religious leaders, diplomats, it doesn't matter. Universally, they are absolutely, wholly, and completely unwilling to be judgmental, to be condemning. And I'm telling you that when you don't hate that which is as evil, as destructive, as diabolical, as menacing, as just overall putrid as Islam, based upon what its lone messenger proclaimed, based upon what its lone messenger Muhammad did, based upon what his Quran reveals, when you're unable to hold the perpetrators accountable for egregious behavior, then indeed you've become part of the problem. And today, as we go through these stories, one of the stories will be about girls that were considered very smart. I mean, the article that I read on them from the BBC must say 7 different times in 7 different ways that they were A students. They were really smart. But I want to tell you, there is a direct correlation between political correctness, which makes hate speech a crime, unless the hate speech is against those that they consider hateful, on which it's okay. That there's a direct tie-in between political correctness that renders people unwilling to be judgmental, to exercise good judgment, to be condemning, to hate those things which deserve our animosity. and the lack of judgment being shown by Muslims when young girls go off to join the Islamic State because they think that the West is immoral and that Islam is moral. It reveals that they're wholly and completely incapable of processing what the Quran says, what Muhammad was like, what Muslims are doing, and morality. So let's begin. This is a story that has lots of perspectives that are worthy of our consideration. It reads, an American aid worker who was killed while being held hostage by the Islamic State. Now, the Islamic State claims that she was killed by an American bombing run. Highly likely. Because where she was held in the buildings most central to the command structure of the Islamic State, in the home being occupied by the top general, if you want to call it a terrorist militia, want to distinguish a commander in that way, but the top commander of jihadists for the Islamic State, and in a building that Ibrahim Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi came to on a frequent basis. And so it is likely that American bombs killed her. It put her out of her misery, though. You see, the American aid worker who was killed while being held hostage by the Islamic State was sexually abused by the group's leader, U.S. officials told the ABC News. They told them in the third week of August. They knew in the first week of June. Kayla Mueller, 26, was repeatedly raped by Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the founder of the Islamic State, the caliph of the Caliphate. And her family was informed about Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi's rape and torture of their daughter in early June. Now, why is it, A, that the leader of the most revered and feared, the most popular and most powerful Islamic organization today, and perhaps in all of human history, while citing the Quran, would perform multiple rapes on a kidnapped girl? That's question number one. Why is this man who was a theologian, who remains a theologian in Islam, who's an imam, who's an Islamic scholar, who is a very good Muslim, who knows the Quran inside and out by memory, who knows every aspect of Muhammad's life, why is such a man kidnapping young girls, torturing them, and raping them? And we'll discuss that. That's the most important question. The second question is, why was the FBI involved in something like this, which was an international incident? Why wasn't it the NSA? Why wasn't it the CIA? I thought the FBI was the domestic police for America. But more important than that, why did the FBI keep this secret? Why? Don't you think that the American people have a right to know? Do you think that the FBI kept it secret because this is the most Muslim of Muslims, and he was raping and torturing a kidnapped girl? And that maybe the FBI was concerned, and the administration that it reports to, that a few people more might make the connection, that there's a few people not so indoctrinated by political correctness that they would actually be able to exercise good judgment and ascertain that the connection between Islam, Muhammad, the Quran, and Hadith, and the kidnap and rape of this girl? Well, it certainly didn't happen in the media because no one in the media held Islam accountable. No one in the media held the Quran accountable. No one in the media held Muhammad accountable. The FBI got their information not because it has great spy capabilities. No. They got their information because when America tried to capture one of the senior leaders of the Islamic State, they kidnapped his wife. And they brought his wife back to the United States or to some undisclosed location and interrogated her. And she spilled the beans. In addition to that, two of the some 6,000 or 7,000 Zoroastrian girls, the Persian girls in Iraq who were kidnapped and auctioned off as sex slaves by the Islamic State, two of them escaped, and the two of the 5,000 or 6,000, 7,000 escaped were later interviewed by American authorities, and that's where they got their information, back in June. They told us that Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, full name Ibrahim Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, married her. And we all understood what that means, her father Carl told the Associated Press. You see, in Islam, while Muhammad had a whole harem, of course the rules of Islam never applied to him. It was the antithesis of Moshe. Moshe was given the great honor of scribing Yahowah's dissertation, his foundational theses on life and choice and morality and of thinking and family. It's called the Torah. And Moshe listened to what Yahowah had to say, observed what Yahowah had to say, and followed Yahowah's guidance. Well, not Muhammad. He was just the opposite. And so Muhammad had a whole harem. At one time, he had as many as 24 sex slaves in his harem, many of them little children under the age of 10 years old. So there's a fourth rotating spot now for average, ordinary Muslims that allows them to kidnap and rape. So I asked the question, what was Kayla Mueller? Why was she being raped and tortured by the most popular, most revered and feared, best example of Islam in the world? Why is the most popular Islamic leader of the most popular Islamic organization, an Islamic cleric whose speeches contain nothing but Quran sightings, what's he doing kidnapping and raping a woman, a 26-year-old? And he, according to the Yazidi women, the Zoroastrian Persians, every time that he would commit torture and rape, he would explain to Kayla that he had total control over her, that she was his property, and that the Quran gave him this right, and that what he was doing was good, was appropriate, was just, according to Islam. And here's the rub. It is. The Quran authorizes sex with captured prisoners. The Quran authorized kidnap, it authorized the slave trade, and it expressly says that sex with your captives is permissible. Now, I didn't hear one commentator, and the New York Times ran a piece on the Yazidi women, not on Kayla Mueller, and how they were raped as the perpetrators read Quran verses and said, we own you, we control you. The Quran authorizes us to do this. We're being religious. We're being Islamic. And these experts In fact, it was two women on the, I believe it was the BBC or CNN, I forgot which one of the two, were supposed to be experts in this. That one was the woman who had written the article for the New York Times, who never once held Islam accountable. Never once. Cited that according to the Yazidi girls that had been kidnapped and turned into sex slaves, that their perpetrators were consistently citing Quran passages to them and examples from the Hadith of Muhammad's behavior. And yet, not once did they say, and you know, that's what the Quran says. They're right. I mean, they're wrong, but this is what the Quran says. The problem here, folks, is Islam. The problem is the Quran. We have, in America and throughout Europe, allowed a religion based upon a book to exist and to thrive, actually, in our countries that advocates kidnap, slavery, rape, and pedophilia, in addition to mass murder and terrorism. Now, when or if an organized crime syndicate endorsed any of those things in writing and their manifesto became public, that organization would be condemned, it would be closed down, shuttered, it would be judged, those in it would be convicted and put away for a very long time. But in the case of Islam, it's blatant, it's right in your face. The Quran authorizes kidnap, authorizes the enslavement of children, authorizes rape, including pedophilia, authorizes and encourages stealing, lying, mass murder, and of course terrorism. And yet we allow Islam in our communities. We allow them to build mosques and to publish their books and to engage in preaching. And no one in the media is capable of holding them accountable. These two dimwits from CNN and the New York Times never once held Islam accountable, its scriptures accountable. And it's worse than just the Quran authorizing kidnap and rape. Muhammad was a multiple rapist. Every time that his goons attacked, terrorized, and ravaged a community of Jews, which were never armed, always defenseless, which was Muhammad's only tactic, was terrorize those who are defenseless, that Muhammad would do as was reported by the Yazidis. The men would be hauled away and murdered, just as Muhammad did. The women then would be divided into groups into who would be domestic slaves and who would be sex slaves, just as Muhammad did. And then, just as Muhammad did, the girls are raped. Kayla Mueller was abducted while working in Aleppo, Syria in August 2013. Talk about stupid. And this was a girl that also worked amongst the quote-unquote Palestinians. Yeah, she was one of these people indoctrinated in political correctness that had no concept of the doctrine that she was serving. Just no concept. But she's presented as a do-gooder. So she was out playing with children and trying to encourage children and drawing pictures with children of Muslims, of future terrorists in the amongst the so-called Palestinians, and then amongst jihadists in Syria. What in the hell is wrong with you? I mean, when you can't figure out that that's a really stupid idea, when you can't put the pieces together to say, you know, what has happened to both men and women who are Americans that are playing aid worker and in an Islamic country rife with Islamic jihadists? What happened to them in Egypt? What happened to them in Tunisia? What happened to them in Yemen? What happened to them in Iraq? What happened to them in Syria? What happened to them in Lebanon? What happened to them in Israel? The same thing, always the same thing. Now, Islam is consistent. It kidnaps, it enslaves, it tortures, and it rapes. And it has ever since Muhammad conceived this religion. I was talking about Muhammad. There were three Jewish communities in Yathrib, a town actually named Yathrib based on Yahud and Yahudi and Yahudah, the related to Yah names associated with the tribe named Judah or Yahudah. Yahud and Yahudim, the plural, meaning those who are related to and who relate to Yahweh. And of those three communities, the first of the three, Muhammad robbed them of their property and sent them out to the desert to die. Then the second, he bludgeoned, terrorized, stealing everything they had as well, but in this case, not allowing them the opportunity to try to survive without any possessions in the desert. The third is the most clearly documented in the Hadith and the Quran. And the third, the Qurayza. Muhammad rounded all the men up just as the Islamic State jihadists do today, bound them, and when they were defenseless, one by one, with Muhammad watching, they cut off every man and boy's head above the age of puberty. And then with their women watching, with the men dead, Muhammad got to first pick. He always would pick the most beautiful of the Jewish girls, no matter her age, no matter the fact that she had previously been married, no matter if she had children who he had just killed, no matter if she had a father whom he had just killed. And he would pull that woman or girl aside, and the Hadith detail his systematic rape of these women. Oh, he would even say, oh, well, Muhammad married her. Now, marriage in Islam is to enslave the woman. There is no difference between an Islamic marriage and the enslavement of a woman. She was, in the case of all three, they're all named. Their rape, their capture, the death of their sons, the death of their brothers, the death of their husbands, the death of their fathers is all chronicled in the Islamic Hadith by Muhammad and his goons, and then Muhammad calling these victims out and raping these women right down to their names is detailed in the Hadith. And don't you think for a moment that these Muslims don't know that. And so they're following Muhammad's example. This is how putrid he was. This is how utterly revolting he was. And how disgusting the religion is that's based on his words and deeds. That's why they say that they're justified in doing so. And if you don't hate the religion, if you don't hate Muhammad, if you don't hate the wannabe God Allah, if you don't hate Islam for creating such a warped moral perspective that kidnap and torture and enslavement and pedophilia and rape and torture and terrorism and mass murder are considered religious, appropriate, and godly, and that these heinous crimes are being perpetrated every day in the name of this religion against defenseless little girls and little boys. If you don't despise that, may I suggest that your soul is already dead. May I suggest that you've lost the ability to be moral. May I suggest that you are as worthless as those perpetrating the acts. And if you are in the media, in politics, in the Department of Justice, in America's spy agencies, in the military, a religious spokesperson, and pontificating deceptions that justify the existence of this religion, then you're worse than the perpetrators. The Islamic State says that she was killed in a Jordanian airstrike in February, but the U.S. blames the group for her death. Of course, America never takes responsibility. Baghdad personally took the humanitarian aid worker to the home of another senior Islamic State member, Abu Sayyaf. Abu Sayyaf is one of the names of many of the, in fact, his particular name of one of those who was close to Muhammad, who was in charge of the Islamic State oil and gas until his death by a U.S. Special Forces operation in May, where we put boots on the ground. We kidnapped his wife. Baghdadi regularly visited the compound where she was being held and repeatedly assaulted her sexually. Kayla did not marry this man. He took her into his room and he abused her, and she came back crying. Her mother, Marcia, told the AP, as it was reported by the Yazidi girls. Officials said that they had obtained information. By the way, from an Islamic point of view, yeah, he married her. And then he raped her. Because marriage in Islam is a title of ownership. And it's a one-way deal. The woman has no rights whatsoever. Officials said they obtained information about the abuse from at least 2 teenage Yazidi girls who were held hostage as sex slaves and found inside the Shayef compound at the time of the U.S. attack. Kayla was reportedly held for some time by Sayef and his wife, Sayef, who was also captured by U.S. Special Forces in May. Kidnapped. At the time, the Pentagon said Sayef was suspected of being an Islamic State member and of being complicit in the enslavement of young Yazidi women who were recruited during the raid. It's true. That's the putrid thing about this religion. That's the putrid thing about most religion. The practitioners of it become ridiculous hypocrites. So women are abused in Islam, so what do? They abuse other women. That's what they do. You know, women are sexually mutilated by their mothers, so when they become mothers, what do? They sexually mutilate their daughters. It is common. Stockholm Syndrome is part of the explanation for this, but it is common in religious and political circles for the victim to become victimizers. And it has been true of Islam for all of Islam's existence. Any woman wearing the headscarf of a Muslim slave is part of the problem. If you're a Muslim woman, you are contributing to the rape, the murder of innocent people. You are part of the doctrine that has chosen to perpetrate 99% of the world's terrorist acts. You are disgusting. This now says that hundreds of young women and girls, it's not hundreds, it's thousands, many of them Yazidis, captured in northern Iraq are believed to be held as sex slaves by the Islamic State militants. Its best count is between 5,000 and 6,000 Yazidis, but Yazidis only make up a tiny, tiny fraction of the population of Iraq and Syria. There were at one time far more Christians. There aren't any more. And so the number of Shia Muslim girls, which outnumber the Christians, Christian Muslim girls, which outnumber the Yazidis, and the Yazidis, that the Islamic State has captured and kidnapped and tortured and raped and turned into sex slaves to reward terrorists is in the tens of thousands, just as it is in the many thousands now by Boko Haram in Nigeria. Kayla Mueller grew up in Prescott, Arizona. I don't know why that means anything, but nonetheless, it is stated with her parents and older brother. Obviously, her parents weren't smart enough to guide her away from the stupidity of political correctness. They describe her, and you can blame her parents, you can blame the media, you can blame U.S. politicians, you can blame religious leaders, you can blame academicians, teachers, professors. You can blame all of them for dumbing this girl down to the point that she could not exercise good judgment, and she put herself in a position where this would occur. Now, it's one thing to be ignorant as a parent and not properly educate your child into the perils of evil doctrines like Islam, which these parents failed to do. It's another thing as politicians and government leaders and religious leaders and teachers not to prepare a person to be able to think and to discriminate between that which is good and bad. It's another thing altogether to be a Muslim, to perpetrate these heinous, perverted acts and believe that they are godly. That's a level of disgusting behavior, of perverted judgment that is far worse than being the agnostic, being amoral. It is immoral. The family describes Yahowah as a woman, and I quote, devoted to life and to helping others. And yet she was serving those committed to death and to abusing others. There's a disconnect there that they've not made. And I want to know, why is it considered politically correct, appropriate, enlightened, caring to serve those, to care for those who are indoctrinated into committing 99% of the world's terrorist acts, who are perpetrating these rapes in the name of their religion? Why is helping them helpful? After graduating, she lived and worked with humanitarian groups. It's like saying I'm a socialist secular humanist. I'm part of the religion of man. I'm part of this new culture that is incapable of being moral, of exercising good judgment, of being discerning, of being discriminating. You know, by saying that she worked for humanist groups, it was something that dawned on me this morning as I was transitioning from my exercise to this program. That there is a fixation today with zombies. I mean, there's got to be a zombie movie about every community, every culture, every time, every circumstance. And, they have weapons that they're selling now to deal with the undead. You know what I think? I think the preponderance of the world is zombies right now. They're the undead. They're incapable of thought. You look at the zombie, they lumber ahead. It's not like it looks like they want others to suffer their same plight. They're in gangs of zombies, thoughtless, immoral, dying. And what really is the difference between the zombies being depicted in the movies and the thoughtless, amoral people that have been indoctrinated by political correctness, social, secular humanism throughout the world today? What's the difference in a religious pontificator, one of these women that leaves Europe to go be a jihadi wife, one of these wives of Islamic State members, one of these jihadists? What's the difference between their killing sprees and their thoughtless, perverted behavior and those of zombies? I would say maybe the only difference is that like most socialist secular humanists who have been indoctrinated so that they do not exercise good judgment, while they're incapable of hating that which should be hated, that they are the zombies that are just going to and fro, She's part of the gang, while the religious zombies are the ones who are murderous. But there are zombies. They are prolific in our world today. She visited refugee camps and played and painted with Syrian children. Played and painted. Yeah, that's helpful. If she was trying to expose what was deadly and deceitful and destructive and damning about Islam to these children, to give these children hope, to serve a purpose, that would be one thing. But what is it hell does it do to play and paint? I don't want Kirk to be mad at me. Painting is an expressive art, and it teaches us to be observant. And if you have the right attitude and perspective, painting can help you see things more clearly, appreciate things more deeply, to understand the nuances of light and life and creation, and how to be an effective observer more than most any other thing. But that's not what was happening here. So in 2013, while leaving a hospital, she was kidnapped by the jihadists of the Islamic State. She was given over to Ibrahim Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, tortured her and raped her while citing the Quran.